Welcome to this explainer. You know, if you've ever stared at a stack of legal paperwork and felt that instant, overwhelming wave of panic, well, you're absolutely not alone. Today, we're demystifying Ontario's eviction notices, specifically those N4, N11, N12, and N13 forms. Let's look at what these forms actually mean and the timelines they set into motion.
Right before we dive into the details, I just want to mention that Olenor is an AI lawyer matching platform, and we don't provide legal advice or guidance. What we're exploring today is strictly for educational purposes based on current rules. So, for your own unique situation, it might be really helpful to consult a licensed legal professional.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll touch on why a notice is actually a clock and not an eviction, decode the four main notices, look at some new rules coming in 2026, explore where these notices tend to fall apart, and wrap up with finding the right help. Let's get right into it. Section 1, Disclaimer and Introduction, setting the stage for clarity. Moving right along to Section 2, a clock, not an eviction, understanding the timelines. So here's a major paradigm shift that might actually help reduce a lot of anxiety. An eviction notice simply creates a right for the landlord to apply to the board if the tenant remains after a specific date. It's not an order to just pack up and leave on the spot. Actually, if a landlord bypasses this process and, say, changes the locks, they're committing an offense. And just to put that into perspective, in 2026, that carries a maximum fine of up to $100,000 for an individual. The legal sequence is always notice, application, a hearing, an order from the board, and only then, if necessary, enforcement by the sheriff.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the data. The media often highlights things like rent evictions, but 59% of all landlord applications begin with just one form, the N4 for arrears. Think about that. In the 2024 to 2025 year, over 45,000 applications were filed. That means nearly 6 in 10 eviction files are fundamentally just about money. It's super important context to keep in mind as we start looking at the specific forms.
Section 3, Decoding the four notices, breaking down the N4, N11, N12, and N13. All right, when we compare these notices side by side, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. It's like the law trades speed for price. Notice how the N4 gives just 14 days for monthly rentals, but it actually allows the tenant to halt the process entirely. On the flip side, the N12 and N13 can't be stopped by the tenant, so they come with much longer notice periods. We're talking 60 and 120 days, and they mandate financial compensation from the landlord. So the whole system is kind of designed to balance the inability to cancel the notice with extended time and financial support. Let's dive a bit deeper into the N4. A tenant might consider that paying absolutely everything owed before that termination date completely cancels the process. It's literally the only notice with this built-in exit route. But keep in mind, the math here is incredibly strict. The day the notice is given doesn't count, and any new rent that falls due while that clock is ticking might also need to be covered to void it. So precision is key. Conversely, let's look at the N11. It's really helpful to recognize that a landlord cannot require a tenant to sign an N11 as a condition of renting. Why? Because it's strictly a mutual agreement. The N11 generates a ton of searches online, but it's entirely different from the rest of the pack because it makes zero allegations. Once it's signed by both parties, it simply provides a clean end date. Because everybody agrees, the board usually won't even schedule a hearing before issuing an order. That's exactly why understanding that signing it is completely voluntary is absolutely crucial. Now, moving on to the N12 and N13. Because these forms can't be voided by the tenant, they carry mandatory financial compensation. The N12 requires the new occupant to stay for at least a year and provides 1 month's rent to the tenant. The N13, which deals with major renovations or demolitions, can require up to 3 months' rent. For an N13, tenants might consider giving written notice before moving out to secure what's called a right of first refusal. That basically lets them return later at their previous rent level. Section 4. New rules in 2026. What is changing and what already has. Okay, here is a critical, active change that is a real game changer. The window to request an order review has quite literally been cut in half. As of July 1st, 2026, if an eviction order is issued, the time allowed to ask the board to review that decision drops from 30 days down to just 15 days. Time is tighter than ever, which really highlights why understanding these documents quickly is so incredibly relevant.
There are also some pending changes from Bills 60 and 97 waiting on proclamation, which might be helpful to keep an eye on for future notices. Once active, an N4 could take effect in just 7 days for all tenancies. Interestingly, a new rule would actually remove the 1 month's compensation on an N12 if the landlord provides 4 months of notice instead of the usual 2. Also, those N13 rent evictions, they'll soon require a formal report from a qualified person to prove the unit actually needs to be empty. It's definitely a shifting landscape, making current, accurate information highly valuable.
Section 5. Where notices fall apart. The common technical pitfalls.
You might assume that disputes usually hinge on complex, dramatic legal arguments, right? But honestly, often it comes down to basic paperwork. The board's instructions are incredibly strict. If a landlord forgets to add 5 days for mail delivery, or if they include a bounce check fee on an N4, which is strictly for rent, the notice might just be deemed void. Even basic errors, like taping the paper to a door, or failing to ensure an N12 lands on the very last day of a rental period, can cause an entire application to be thrown out months down the line.
Section 6. Finding the right help. Navigating the next steps with Olaner.
Because these matters run on such short deadlines, platforms like Olanor can be utilized to quickly connect with licensed professionals and no cost for the match. When a notice has a ticking clock attached to it, spending a week calling around just isn't ideal. A smart matching system basically routes your specific details directly to licensed professionals who practice this very specific area of law every single day.
So, what's next? Well, a common next step is to systematically assess the form using a few basic steps before the date on the paper arrives. It's generally helpful to first identify the exact form number you're dealing with. Then, calmly calculate the termination date. After that, review whether the specific form allows for the clock to be stopped, like paying those arrears on an N4 we talked about. Finally, it could be highly beneficial to run all those facts by a licensed representative who can offer guidance based on current law.
As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with an important question. How might a professional perspective clarify your specific situation before the clock runs out? By understanding that these forms are timelines, not immediate evictions, and by knowing the distinct mechanics of the N4, N11, N12, and N13, the whole process becomes something you can logically navigate. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore Ontario's tenancy notices. See you next time.